Okay, there we go. We're recording.
So all of you that can hear me, this is going to be a recording, and anything you say will be captured and published on our website. And if there's something you don't want seen, feel free to turn off your video. Anything that you say, though, will be recorded, and anything that is in the view of your camera will be on our website as a documentation of this meeting. So I'll say something exactly like that when everybody's on. It is 6 o'clock, so if you, Robin, can you start us? Great. Well, I want to welcome everybody that's here. Tonight's event is really a public hearing, and this is the first of two hearings. This hearing will be a presentation of information about both the stewardship plan, which is recently completed, and also a presentation of the information in the draft master plan that the City Parks Department did, to try to present all the information that citizens would need to meaningfully participate in the further development and clarification and perhaps correction of some of the plans that have been made in these two efforts to preserve the 100-acre wood and make it a place where the public will be welcome and where the public can interact with nature in a very meaningful way, in a unique way that isn't available elsewhere in our community. We'd like to welcome all of you to come to attend. The first part of the meeting is going to be a presentation first by Tina Mirabal and by Chris Webb, who work with Herrera. They're both long-term members of our community. They're have been very involved in volunteering for the preservation and appropriate development of this parcel. And so we were delighted that they were able to bring their scientific expertise to join us. The second presentation is going to be by John McLaughlin, who is a PhD in ecology from Stanford University, who teaches at the university here, Western Washington University, and he'll be doing the presentation about the park draft master plan. Well, we'd like to welcome all of you, and I'd like to start by doing the presentation, an overview, really, of the stewardship plan and what some of the findings were. Yes.
We do have the roll call and the motion to approve the agenda first.
We'll do that. I was kind of waiting for that until we actually have an opportunity for more people to be here. I see there's now 16, so there are more people coming. And I believe that's John McLaughlin, our other member, who's connecting his audio now. So as soon as John's in, we'll open the meeting formally and move forward. This is a meeting of the Chuckanut Community Forest Park District, and I'm Frank James. I'm the president of the board and a commissioner. I'd like to take a roll call. John Brown has been excused as he's traveling. He's in New York City. Hugh Beatty, are you present?
Yes, I am.
Thanks, Hugh. And John Hymas?
Present.
John McLaughlin?
Present.
So we have a quorum, and I'll open the meeting with that. We do have an agenda. Gentlemen, each of you have received a copy of that agenda. I'd like to hear any motion with respect to that, and after we have a motion, we can have a discussion. Do I hear a motion to accept our agenda for this meeting? If you need to review it, just go back and check. It was sent to you by Robin Albro, our secretary.
I move to approve the agenda.
All right.
Second.
I hear a motion and a second. All those in favor, raise your right hand, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, gentlemen. The motion passes unanimously. So I'd like to formally open the hearing at this point. What I said earlier, just for the new people who have newly joined us, it is being recorded, and your likeness and your words and the things in the environment behind you are going to be present in the video if you have your video on, and that will those things will appear on our website. If you want to not have your likeness or the things in your environment there, you can turn your video off and feel free to comment. We welcome anybody to come by either by Zoom or by phone. We're going to start the meeting, and there are two phases really. We're going to talk about the stewardship plan, And there's going to be a presentation by Tina and Chris Webb. And then there's going to be a presentation by John McLaughlin on the draft master plan the city's developed. And we'll then move on to having a time when people will be able to hopefully ask questions primarily. We've envisioned this as a two-step process. This one first, getting everything clear so that people understand what it is. We'll have an opportunity to ask questions after these presenters present. And then we'll have a period of time when anybody that likes to make a comment can make a comment. So that's the format. So there is a Q&A area at the bottom of your screen if you're online. And if you click that Q&A, you will be able to write questions into our presenters. And so we'd be happy to try to answer those questions as a presentation are being made or at the completion of the presentation. So if you can find that Q&A at the bottom, sort of in the center, if you click on that, you can then ask a question in writing, and we can get those questions answered while the presenters are doing their presentation or after the presentation is completed. And then after that process of presenting the information at a fairly high level and a summary level, then we'll be able to have some comments and questions in person. Once we have that done, we'll then be able to have a period of time where people are able to look at these documents and go over them. They're both already on our website, and you're welcome to look at the Chuckanut Community Forest Park District website and get the actual document itself. There are beautiful graphics, lots of information in both documents. I encourage everybody to read them. And then on the 27th, at our next scheduled board meeting, we will have a second public hearing, hopefully where people can come back better informed with productive comments where we can go back and make recommendations about modifying these documents or clarifying information in the documents. I hope that's an adequate overview of where we're going tonight. And I'd like to invite our consultants from Herrera, Chris Webb and Tina Morello, to present their information. Chris.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to start my share again here. 1 second. There we go. So hopefully you're seeing my shared screen.
We do.
Great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Webb, and I'm a civil engineer with Herrera Environmental Consultants here in Bellingham. I've been a practicing civil engineer in Bellingham since 1995, and my practice is focused on reducing the environmental impact of our infrastructure and focusing on stormwater management and leading projects in sensitive ecological areas. And our Herrera, we are about 10 of us here in Bellingham, and we have our headquarters in Seattle. And we were retained by the Chuckanut Community Forest Park District to prepare this stewardship plan. And the lead author of the plan is Tina Morable, who's an ecologist in our office, and I'll let her introduce herself as well as take us through. We have just 9 slides that summarize the high-level scope and scale of the stewardship plan, and the complete plan, as Frank mentioned, is 75 pages long or so, and it's on the district's website for further, more detailed review. But with that, I will let Tina introduce herself. Tina, you are muted. You are still muted.
There we go.
Mute. Okay, got it.
There you
Okay.
go. Perfect. Thank you. There you go.
Thanks for everyone for your interest in this this document. I just want you to know that technically I feel a little bit at odds because I'm actually calling from my cell phone.
Yeah, Tina, you're breaking up,
I
unfortunately.
had a day in the field,
you go.
so I'm trying my best to kind of keep up with everybody. But I also wanted to recognize Danielle Raposa, who is also on this call. She is the co-author with me, and actually a lot of the beautiful photos and graphics in this presentation she also pulled together for us today because I was in the field. So anyway, oh, and I don't know if I mentioned I'm a senior ecologist and professional wetland scientist. And I've been in Bellingham since 1995 and regulatory capacity at Whatcom County and the city of Bellingham. So kind of in a different roles. So our second slide, which Chris is managing, moving the slides around, is showing our, have that. Sorry. I'm not done speak.
Oh, shoot.
Hold on. Trying. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the only thing I need to do is get the presentation to show up again. So
We're looking at
I'm
slide
sorry.
2.
Yeah. I mean, it's not on my phone right this minute. So there. I know it's the purpose slide. I really apologize. I just didn't anticipate not being on a computer for this today. So, oh, I see. Okay, I will do this. Okay, it's loading. There we go. Okay, so as Frank mentioned, the purpose of this document is to support the Chuckanut Community Forest Park District's mission to ensure that the entirety of the Chuckanut Community Forest, which is 82 acres of forested property, is protected in perpetuity in public ownership with respect for its recreation and educational functions. And the plan is intended to contribute towards the city's park master plan, which John will be presenting an overview after our presentation. And we're trying to provide a framework for the protection, conservation, and restoration of the community forest. And it's also been prepared to support the joint community forest park district and the city in developing an updated conservation easement that will define the future use and management of the site. So we used a couple of methods to approach the project. One was we reviewed and built upon past studies, of which there have been many, but I just am highlighting a few of those that some of you may already be familiar with, which was the baseline documentation report that was prepared by Ann Eisinger in 2017. And there's a lot of scientific knowledge that is presented in that report that was very helpful for us to kind of get our hands around the existing conditions on the site. And then we also were able to tap into a wetland tree survey that James Luce at the city of Bellingham, he was an arborist for park operations in 2009. And then lots of available maps and GIS data, mostly from the city and Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and other sources. And then we also conducted a field investigation. And the purpose of that was to use best available science to inform the long-term restoration and stewardship of the community, of the Chuckanut Community Forest. So we were concentrating on developing restoration needs and strategies, prioritizing areas for presentation. We did the ground truthing in trying to get at the forest structure.
You broke up a little bit there, Tina. I think you were saying
identify habitat opportunities that would be moving through the park. Sorry, what?
Oh, you
Hello?
broke up a little bit there. I think you were
Oh.
talking about forest structure, but you kind of broke up, but
Yeah.
you're back now.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, conducting ground truthing. That was part of our field investigation to kind of got our hands wrapped around that. Then the very next slide shows one of the several figures, but this one summarizes the locations of the wetlands. There were 16 identified by prior delineations at the site, but a lot of that information was from 2009. So in order to be current with code and methodologies from the city as well as ecology, we updated those ratings. The wetland ratings and the buffer widths were also, they're wider now than what they would have been in 2009. We also used hydraulic modeling to kind of estimate the surface water connections on how all of these wetlands in the forest kind of work and share together important habitat. And so in doing that, we came up with 5 categories to prioritize protection areas, with the highest being the category 1, mature forested wetlands, which is a relatively rare habitat basically in the state. And then other wetlands were also prioritized. They came in second for as important. And then the hydraulic modeling kind of showed the non-wetland drainages that we wanted to highlight to make sure that as the forest gets utilized, that we're not impacting those hydrology connections and trying to preserve the surface water flows and groundwater flows throughout the property. And then the city's regulated buffers were the 4th priority for protection. And then the non-critical areas, the non-critical area regulated upland forest, which again is a very forest, and it's intact.
We lost you there for a minute, Tina. You were
Oh.
saying the priority 5 was what?
The non-critical area regulated upland forest. And even though it might not be regulated as a critical area, it's still a very important habitat. I mean, this is why we love the community forest. It's an intact forest within, a residential urban community. So it still is important for recognizing that those upland forest areas are something we want to protect. So on the next slide, we kind of overlaid the trail network as it exists over the priority habitat areas to try to identify areas that seem to be prioritized for restoration actions. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 prioritized areas, and they're labeled A through G on the map.
We lost you
Some
again.
degraded.
Oh, we lost you again, Tina. We got
Okay.
the 7 areas and they're shown on the map. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
The Wi-Fi connection goes in and out. So the main actions within these areas are restoring degraded habitat, which there's an area called the gravel yard wetlands where we have trails going through there. It's not necessarily forested. There's a lot of opportunity to remove invasive plants and put more native vegetation. And then some of them are about removing trails where they're cutting through wetlands or buffer areas, and or improving drainage connections, which might be putting in a boardwalk or a culvert. So that was kind of the areas that we identified as, if we can do these things, this will really help improve the forest condition. And the next slide kind of shows ways for soil and hydraulic preservation related to trails. And I mentioned boardwalks, but there's also a sense of narrowing some of the trails that have gotten kind of wide to just allow a more kind of connectedness with the forest. When you're on a smaller trail, it feels more nature oriented. And also Herrera is very experienced in doing low impact kind of development methods. And we kind of have this thing called the burrito, which was done up north. Chris actually led that action, but it's a way of kind of wrapping soils, trying to not have them get compacted, but still allow access as a trail through an area that might be sensitive.
Yeah, I'll just clarify on that, Tina. So the burrito is a ballast rock wrapped in geotextile fabric. It is actually now a City of Bellingham Parks standard for maintaining shallow groundwater flow, particularly in wetland and conductivity scenarios. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next slide was just kind of recognizing the wildlife habitat and ways to what kind of impacts, how they can occur. And of course, there's direct disturbances, which is, loving the forest too much almost with all the trail users, what time of year we might be in there. If it's wet, then some impacts will be more apparent into soil conditions and hydrology. And activities such as dogs off leash is also the literature. We did quite a bit of literature review to kind of look at wildlife habitat and how the forest gets used in ways that we can kind of minimize impacts. Also, there's habitat degradation is another way of impacting the opportunities for wildlife by disturbing their vegetation that they might be relying on for shelter or refuge. And then there's also potential for invasive species to be dispersed within the native habitats or even overtake native forest habitats. And just recognizing that we don't want to try to disturb sensitive areas, as well as habitat fragmentation that also with the number and the spatial distribution of trails, we can separate habitats and lose that connectivity. Like for instance, some of the trails do go through wetland areas, and we want to try to recreate or reroute trails to avoid those kind of impacts. And then the final slide is just kind of different methods, as I mentioned, for opportunities for improvement for wildlife habitat in the forest, which is removing the trails from the priority areas and preserving and restoring habitat and hydrology, planting native plants, getting rid of invasive plants, and discourage off-trail use, especially in priority areas, which could be fencing or hedges. Signs can be used to educate and kind of formulate behaviors within it, within the forest as people are using it. And then just, again, more opportunities for we need to have ongoing maintenance and monitoring through the years so that we can determine if our restoration actions are actually working and or recognize areas that might need to be addressed as things occur, like maybe encampments within the park space within that. And that is pretty much it. Do you have anything else you wanted to add, Chris?
I just wanted to add for the attendees that all of the graphics and a lot more are available in the report at a higher resolution. So I'm aware that on the screen in the PowerPoint format, it might be a little hard to see some of the specifics, but all of the figures in the report are high resolution PDFs. And so you can zoom in and get much more detail than we were able to share in this overview.
Thanks, Chris.
Tina. Really appreciate the high-level summary. And I think Chris's point that the level of detail in the extensive report is going to be really helpful for you. This is an idea of what's in the report, but really you need to dig into the details and look at the references and begin to review the science to begin to make those difficult decisions about what needs to be prioritized and what we need to do to preserve this parcel of land and this wetlands forest that is unique and our responsibility to protect going forward. I don't see any Q&A questions written in. I don't know if people are having trouble accessing that or not, or there were 2 questions asked and I think the first one was answered. The first one was a complaint that they couldn't hear everything, and we're sorry for that. We hope you can hear. And the comment was that, yeah, it was better. If there are any other written questions, that'd be great. I'd also like to open it up to the people that are here to ask questions. If you raise your hand, Michael Chavario, I'd like to recognize you and allow you to speak, buddy. What was it that you wanted to add or ask?
I want to ask a question.
Sure.
And I went over the Parks Master Plan final draft pretty thoroughly, and just from my understanding, because I haven't been deeply involved with this process, that the plan that we just had a overview of is much more environmentally aggressive in terms of protection of the environment than the draft master plan. And so my question is, the draft master plan, it is different and produced by the city with public input from this environmental review that we just saw the presentation of. Can you explain the difference between those 2 things, Frank?
I'm happy to, and I'll ask Chris to maybe add what he thinks. But basically, it was our opinion that the science needed to be looked at in more detail than was done in the master planning process. I was on the steering committee, as were a number of other people here. I felt, and I think the commission felt, that more science needed to be reviewed to understand some of the really difficult problems. It wasn't just a popularity contest of who wants to use the park for what and how to treat it like any other park. The unique features of this parcel actually really mandate that we do the 3 things that were mentioned: to restore and to protect and to really make this a place that will be there for our children's grandchildren in a relatively pristine state. So that means not only protecting what's there, but restoring some of the things that were lost. And that's really what this contract and this effort was made to do, was to augment the work the city did and to make it bring in more science and to bring in a broader array of issues that our science that was reviewed then indicated was important to look at. Chris, did you have a further comment about that?
Well, just that I think there's our effort and the city's master planning effort was done a little bit in parallel. I think maybe ideally it could have been done a little more in series, but the intent of our plan was to gather up the information, previous studies, update it with current information, and tee up the relevant science to inform the decisions that are made in the master plan, and provide this report as a resource for that process.
There was the discussion in the steering committee for the master plan development went to the fact that there was a great hurry to get it done, and there was a sense of urgency to get it done so that it could be approved by the fall. Um, uh, I would have hoped it could have been a more process in series, as Chris says, you know, that this could have informed that process in a better way. We did have one overlapping meeting where we made our consultants available to the city to talk about issues of the science of it. It was a couple hours long, and I think it was productive and useful, but I think there's a lot more issues that need to be discussed. I think the upshot from my point of view is that these discussions and this are studies informing the master planning process is now going to have to take place during the public review period at the upcoming Parks Board Advisory Board meeting, at the upcoming Greenways meeting, and then in conjunction between our elected commissioners for the Park District and the City Council. That's really where the opportunity will be to bring this scientific information to bear on the ultimate master planning document that will be developed. Does that answer your question, Michael? Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Just feel ready to, Jerry.
There's another question listed.
Yeah, I'm Jerry, you're allowed to talk. You're turned on, buddy.
Okay, there we go. Let's see, just one comment that.
You could identify yourself. That'd be great for the public record. Yeah.
Jerry Wilbur, 705 Chuckanut Drive North. One comment, about burrito drains, FYI, the boardwalk there going out of Fairhaven Park, that's a burrito drain approaching the boardwalk. So that's just an example of a functioning one. Doesn't look like much from the surface. It's what's underneath that counts. I had a question, and that is, it looked like you had proposed a trail system. I guess it's on page 40 is kind of your final proposal for a trail system. And it looks to me that the most northerly trail you have on that goes north of wetland AA. And that trail, I think, goes over some very challenging terrain, does it not? There's some really steep, and that's up on that ridge top there, and it just strikes me as a really inappropriate place for a primary trail. I'm just wondering if that's accurate.
Sure. The scope of our study was to focus on the stewardship of the property from an ecological point of view. And we did not have as our primary focus the trail master plan from a utility or an recreation experiential point of view. That was the purview of the city's plan. While we considered, I think, some fundamental basic logic of connectivity in our work, we were not attempting to create the trail master plan. We are trying to create a plan that is using that lens. So the trail net, and I think it's page 45, Jerry, that you're referring to, where we kind of show the ultimate endorsed trail plan when we delete the segments that have the highest impact. So if that helps, and you know, it was really kind of a division of labor and a focus that we had, because the city is very clearly doing the trail master plan from a trails user experience centered kind of point of view.
I did read your whole report, but I skimmed it. I sped read it, and I may have missed that in the narrative. If that's not clear in the narrative, you might it might be wise to add that something to that effect, because I took it quite literally and went, oh my God, this doesn't work, type thing, you know, from a physical standpoint. So I just wanted that clarification, and thank you for that.
Yeah, we can probably illustrate that a little more clearly, that really we were trying to stay in our lane of property protection and not into the city's realm of more of the experiential planning effort.
Mhm, mhm.
Thanks, Jerry, and thank you, Chris. Jacob Stewart, please share a question with us or a comment.
Hi, Jacob Stewart, and thanks for letting me show up to ask questions. The first question I have right now, after hearing
Jacob, you're
oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not
Jacob,
quite
you're
sure
in
what
and out.
happened. I might have hit the wrong button. Sorry about that,
I think
Jacob.
you and I were both pushing buttons. So sorry, Jacob.
Well,
Please
thanks
go
for letting
ahead.
me giving the public an opportunity to ask questions. I had an opportunity to read the 75-page report over the weekend, and I found that pretty interesting. The question I had was that it seemed to me that the material recommendations that Herrera was making sort of solely related to trail deletions. And I was wondering if you would agree with that characterization, and if not, if you could let us know if you have any other sort of material recommendations.
I think it was, yeah, trail deletions for the reasons of fragmentation of habitat and all of the reasons that are described, but also hydraulic connection improvements. So to improve the site hydrology and to, restore interrupted hydrology, which will support, aquatic habitat.
Okay.
That was, yeah, that was I think the lion's share of the recommendations were around restoring habitat integrity, as well as the aquatic habitat hydraulic connections.
Thanks.
Thank you, Stuart. We have a written question too that I'll try to get this right. Jessica Orr asked, could you please go into more detail on how the city's master plan scientific methods weren't sufficient? Who determined this? A number of us were involved at the steering committee level with the work that the city parks did, and actually Lane Potter and Nicole Oliver are with us tonight in the audience. And I think that the issue was much of the decision-making process involved public comment. And so they had a very effective and good system for getting public input. My feeling was that was more a popularity contest about who wants to do what. If you ask people, do you want to ride your bike here? Lots of people are going to say yes. If you ask people, do you want to walk your dog here? A lot of people are going to say yes. And what we wanted was not what's popular or what people like to do. We really wanted to get to the science behind if having dogs there or if having bicycles in the park, if they make an impact on the long-term survivability of the ecological environment. So that's the question we sought to answer with the work that was done. Same thing about trails. This isn't the stewardship plan was not an effort to redo or have a substitute for the master planning process. The master planning process is the master planning process. What we wanted to do is provide additional information, as Chris just said, about the trade-offs and the impacts of putting a trail in one place and not another. We also want to have some idea about the cost of those various projects so that we can realistically plan for what can and can't be done. It might be great to have a good idea, but if you can't afford it, then it's not a real idea. So that's the gist of it. Jessica, I hope that answers your question. And if you'd like to, feel free to ask, to raise your hand if you'd like to.
I'd like to say something, Frank.
Sure.
In
Commissioner Hugh Beatty, by the way, speaking.
There are footnotes at the end of the report. And one of them I found was quite good. I looked into it a little deeper and I'd suggest that people take a look at it. It's called The Impact of Dogs on Wildlife and Water Quality. And it was a literature review done in April of 2016 by the Metro Park and Nature by a woman named Lori Hennings. for the, and it's available at oregonmetro.gov. And it talks about a lot of impacts that people maybe never thought about. You know? And I've been thinking, well, here we've got these wetlands that are fairly shallow, and we have all these extra dogs in there pooping and peeing into that water, and it heats up in the summer, and it's probably quite difficult for a lot of animals to reproduce, the frogs and the amphibians and such. And so it's kind of a critical area, being that it's such shallow wetlands. You know, it's not like we have Lake Whatcom with a deep thing. You know, it's like these shallow wetlands, and they're quite sensitive, I would think. So anyway, that's something to think about, folks.
Hugh, that's a good example of science being brought to bear on it. That they went out, they found that review, they included in this study. So that as we move forward, we can look at what science says about the wisdom of some of the choices, like having dogs and what the impacts are. It's not a popularity contest. It's actually based. We have to look at the science that informs the decision in order to preserve this parcel in perpetuity, to make it as stable and a long-term resource as possible. Are there any other comments? Well, I'd like to go ahead and move forward then, and John McLaughlin, who's a scientist of some repute and one of our colleagues on one of the commissioners on the Park District, has taken a detailed look at the master planning process, and will review it at this point and provide additional insights into what's there and what might how that might be improved going forward, how we can build on what's been done to make it a more robust product. John?
All right, thank you, Frank. I hope some of what I'll try to keep it brief, provide more comment. Hope some of what I'll have to say will actually provide a deeper answer to some of the questions people have been asking, in particular, the relationship between the master plan and the stewardship plan. Really are quite complementary, and the master plan needs the stewardship plan. And actually, I would disagree a little bit with what Frank was saying about popularity contests. I think what we're really talking about is the city exercising its responsibility to decide about what happens to this place, but then they need information on how to achieve their goals. And right now that information is lacking from the master plan, and a lot of it is provided in the stewardship plan. So we really have an opportunity to collaborate and work together. But let me take a step back. And
could
yes.
you speak up just a tad?
Sure. All right, so can everyone see that? So this is a brief outline. I'll try to keep it quick or brief. Start off with our mission statement. That's how we usually start our public meetings, to remind everyone what this park district is all about. A little bit of context for both the hearing and the process for where we go forward regarding this place in our community. A little bit of the time frame of how we got here and where we're going. Then a review of what's in the master plan. Tina and Chris reviewed what's in the stewardship plan, so I think I'll skip over that, and then have a brief list of topics that people might want to consider. I'm sure people have their own topics, but some things to consider that as you're reviewing the plans or in addition to what you've been thinking, and then yield the floor for public comment. So our mission is to ensure the entirety of the property is protected in perpetuity. That gets to beyond the grandchildren of our children. In public ownership with respect to its ecological, recreational, and educational functions, and to serve as a fiscal mechanism through which the district via tax levy will repay the city of Bellingham for the Greenways Endowment Fund loan. That latter function has been achieved. The former is ongoing and lasts in perpetuity. And much of what I'll have to say is, how do you achieve those three main interests of ecological function, of recreational use, and educational benefit? So let me start with a little bit of context to keep in mind as we work with each other, as we consider what the plans are, what our preferences are, and all that. First, we are very fortunate to be where we are. We may have principal disagreements about the plan, about its policies, about implementation, but I want to remind everyone, as of only a decade ago, the plan was to clear cut the forest, to fill most of the wetlands, and to replace the area with buildings, roads, and parking lots. We have this meeting and this master plan because the community cared. It had input. We put up money. And so we are fortunate to have the opportunity to decide, okay, what's going to happen to this place, given that we avoided a very different outcome. Our disagreements are healthy. We may disagree vehemently about policies, about what happens, what people are allowed to do, what people are not allowed to do, and so on. But that means that people care about this place. And it's because people care about this place that we can actually talk about it instead of it being a private development. My second comment is to have respect and empathy for everyone involved. The Parks Department is responsible for a very large portfolio throughout the city. Their responsibilities exceed really the resources in staff and funding, tools and information that they have. And so the place we're talking about tonight is really important, but it's a small part of their jobs. And so as we talk about this place and about the plans, have our principal disagreements, please remember that the park staff has a lot to do, and they're doing the best they can with what they have. And we should think of ourselves as partners in that process rather than critics. The commission, the Chuckanut Community Forest Parks District Commission, we're all volunteers. We've devoted time, thought, effort without compensation. And so this, again, is people who care a lot about a place and are doing our best to fulfill our mission, to achieve, to serve the community. Everyone has a stake in this place. We all have opinions. And so I urge us to listen and to respect everyone. Respect and empathy are vital to the community in a community forest. And then the third part is the Parks Department actually decides policy and management. The Chuckanut Community Forest Park District and its commission do not. We, as a commission, cannot outlaw bicycle riding. We can't require you to leash your dog. The hearing tonight is an opportunity to share your ideas about policy and management to support a more robust public process. But the commission does not get to make or implement any of those policies. We can facilitate public process, public input, public participation in what this place is. And that's what. So the public hearing and process that we're doing and have done over the years is actually quite different than the way the city has done it. The city has had a survey and an open house. The Park District has had years of open public meetings, and we've had 3 hearings in which people get to say what they want, what they think, unscripted, unfiltered, limited in time so that everyone gets to speak, but it is a very different process than what the city has done. So I hope they're complementary and yield a better result as a result. The future of this place and the master plan goals to some degree are in conflict. As I'll get into, goal 1 in the master plan is to restore and protect ecological functions. Goal 2 is to provide recreational opportunities. Those two goals are often in tension. And in fact, that's a tension that has played out with every public land management agency across the country and across the world. The use, recreational use, particularly when it gets intensive, often degrades ecological function. And so the challenge for planning and for implementation and for management is how to provide for that recreational use while also doing our best to protect and to restore. And so because we are working in an area of classic tension, we should expect to find it here. We should expect to have disagreements, people with place different emphases on goal 1 versus goal 2. So let's keep that in mind too. We are dealing in areas that have tension by nature, and that's perhaps a good thing. It means everyone cares. People can find the 2 documents we're talking about, the master plan and the stewardship plan, at the 2 websites here. The Chuckanut Community Forest Park District website has links to both. The city has a link to the master plan. But if you want to get to at this point, if you want to get to the stewardship plan, you have to go to the Park District site. All right, this basically makes the same point that we are in tension. Recreational use of outdoor places has increased exponentially during the pandemic. It's expected to continue. We have seen the effects of growing use of this place on the ecological function. And so that tension has shifted towards recreation and to the degradation of many of the ecological conditions and ecological functions in the place. And much of the stewardship plan is designed to how to restore that place to support recreational use, but also to restore the ecological functions and conditions that we all value. This is just basically showing the location within a network, a national network's pivotal hub of biodiversity, of recreational access, a variety of other things. I'll skip on that and go to the timeline. So we are in the middle of actually a fairly long process. The acquisition of these places started several decades ago, ultimately leading to the last large purchase of the 82 acres that we're calling the Chuckanut Community Forest 11 years ago. The Park District, established a couple years after that, then led to a conservation easement with the city in the next year. And then over the prior 3 years, we held 3 public meetings in addition to our monthly public meetings in which people had an opportunity to speak. But we had 3 public meetings that considered and took input on what people cared about for various elements, what is now becoming the master plan. What do you think about trails, use, policy, whatever you think about this place? Then the city started its process last year with online surveys, engaged Bellingham, a bunch of volunteers conducted in-person surveys at the Chuckanut Community Forest. Then last year, the steering committee met. Frank spoke a little bit about what was involved there. This past spring, the city held its virtual open house, anticipating what the master plan would involve, followed up with another survey. In April, Herrera released its draft stewardship plan to the commission, and we've been reviewing it ever since. Last month, the city released a draft master plan, and then just a few days ago, released its quote final draft master plan. And then just a few days ago, the commission, made its final stewardship plan available on its website. The plan from here is later this month, the city council will review and vote on the master plan. And then if you read the master plan, it envisions 2 implementation phases with unspecified timeframes. So now I'd like to get into the master plan, in particular in the context of this fairly expedited timeline. What does it involve? So the main components of the master plan are basically outlined by the chapters. History of how we got to this place, what's there now, what was the planning process leading to development of the master plan, and then looking at what are the goals, the strategies, and the milestones for achievement in the master plan. Implementation strategy, which I will argue, actually the implementation strategy is what's in Herrera's report. It's really not that much detail of implementation in the master plan. And then a set of decommissioning criteria to decide which trails to keep and which trails to remove. And then it provides a number of schematics and photographs of what an outdoor classroom might look like. This is a map of the implementation plan. And so there you can see there are a few critical elements. We've got a primary trail that connects the interurban trail to Fairhaven Park and then over to Chuckanut Drive. There are a number of secondary trails in here. Some trails to be removed, some trails to be retained, and some trails to be realigned. There is up in the upper corner a there we go. There is in the upper corner an outdoor classroom and a variety of other things. All right, so that's basically a summary of the implementation plan. Details are in the report, and actually, if you want to know what it would take to achieve this map, a lot of the actual work is described in the stewardship plan, but it's not really in the master plan. All right, so now I'd like to give you a glimpse of what is envisioned for this main trail. All right, there's an image in the stewardship plan of what that might look like. It's a 6 to 12 foot wide crushed limestone road or trail, depending on what you want to call it. It basically conforms to the city's trail standards. The actual trail in the Chuckanut Community Forest would be in forested areas, unlike this rather open area, and it probably wouldn't have rocks along it, but the trail surface would be very much like this. And so that's something to consider is that what people want for the main trail, again, connecting the three major trailheads between the Interurban Trail, the Fairhaven Park, and Chuckanut Drive. And we'd be talking about something that you could drive a vehicle on. Another thing I like to point out, this gets into the issue of science. The master plan includes work from the city's urban forestry management plan. And that plan determined that the forest in the Chuckanut Community Forest, or the 100-acre wood, is what they call young forest tall. And they classify forest using three categories. The first is the age of the forest. The second is the height, actually the height of the maximum height of trees in the forest. And the third is the structure of the understory. And they concluded that Chuckanut Community Forest is young forest tall. It's in a transition between a young forest and a mature forest. But if you actually look at those three characteristics, the master plan itself notes that the forest age is between 90 and 100 years, which puts it well within the range for a mature forest and older than a young forest tall. And if you look at the heights, I've got a graph here showing what are the heights of the maximum tree heights in there. And the average of those heights is at the upper end for a mature forest. And so by height criteria, the Chuckanut Community Forest is clearly a mature forest and much taller than a young forest tall. And then if you consider the understory structure, in the Anni Singer's baseline report, she notes 10 species of understory trees. in the forest. There actually is a fairly well-developed understory in the Chuckanut Community Forest. Not as well developed as you get in an old growth forest, but it's clearly commensurate with what we would call a mature forest. And the only reason I mention this is some of the limited science in the master plan, and it's incorrect. Right, this forest is by every criteria very clearly a mature forest, and it ought to be the master plan, if it does nothing else, ought to get its facts correct. All right, Tina and Chris already talked about this, the stewardship plan. Really, what I echo some of what I said before is the master plan has a bunch of goals, and there's some very appropriate goals. When you review the master plan, that's some of the critical things you ought to be looking at, or what are the goals for this place? How you achieve many of those goals is in the stewardship plan. All right, let me skip over that. In one of our public hearings, this is a summary of the comments people got. They wanted to keep trails. They wanted a primary loop trail. They wanted to be able to start and finish in the same area, but walk through or travel through a considerable portion of the forest. They wanted secondary trails so they could feel like they're alone in the place, which means both you have secondary trails and you have substantial vegetation, at least up to the shrub layer, to give them a sense of solitude where they can't look over and see people on an adjacent trail. Boardwalks are okay. And you can see the rest of it. There was conflicting comments on both bikes and dogs. There are very strong opinions in both directions for both of these interests. And so as people consider the plan, I would suggest these following topics in addition to the ones you may have. I put in large font both bicycle policy and access and dog policies, because those are the issues we've received the most comments by far on. Again, the commission does not get to decide these policies. This is what the Parks Department does. And so please share with us your interests in access or policies regarding both bicycles and dogs. But again, keep in mind that we don't get to decide that. In addition, the report starts out in both the first two chapters and mentions Indigenous peoples, but I think does so in a rather disrespectful way, as if they no longer have an interest in this place, as if they're not here. And I think that is a breach that really needs to be repaired citywide, but particularly with this place. The trail plan, there's some elements in there that are consistent with what we've heard with public input and contradict some of what people heard. In particular, this notion of a wide crushed limestone path or road. Many people have said they absolutely do not want that in this place. There may be reasons other people do, but that would be something to weigh in on. I've already talked about bikes and dogs. The master plan stewardship plan relationship. The master plan as it's written does not mention the stewardship plan. It needs to, because the stewardship plan is actually provides really valuable information for how you would achieve many of the goals in the master plan. So again, I think these are very complementary, hand in glove sort of relationship that ought to be part, the stewardship plan ought to be part of the master plan. Climate resiliency, I think we have a lot further to go on that. The climate resiliency components in the stewardship plan, in the master plan, really are underrepresent what is possible here. We as a commission have talked about how the place can support climate resiliency a whole lot better than what's in the master plan, and we'd be happy to share that. In fact, we even got designs and reports for how to do that. And then finally, what's missing from the master plan, in addition to what's all the actual work that's described in the stewardship plan, is a schedule for how phase 1 and phase 2 will be implemented. It does break tasks into phase 1 and phase 2, but doesn't say when any of those things would happen. A budget for how that's going to happen. And again, as Frank mentioned, if you don't have money to do something, then it's unrealistic to expect that you're actually going to do it. And then in particular, monitoring. We need to know whether what we're doing is working to determine if our investments are paying off or if we need to do things differently. And with that, I think I'll close it out and open up for public comment. There's a lot more to talk about with the master plan. I encourage everyone to read both it and the stewardship plan in detail and weigh in, because this is your place, this is your city, and we're all part of the same community.
Thank you, John. That was an excellent review. Appreciate it. Jacob raised his hand and has a question or comment. Jacob, would you like to let us know?
Yeah, can you guys hear me this time?
We can, yeah.
So I watched the recording on the last meeting, and I think it was the last meeting. The commissioner stated that park staff would be invited to present or give a presentation on their plan. And now it's mentioned, I think, that Nicole and Lane are here. So it's a two-part question. The first part is, why did park staff not present their master plan? And then the second part is, why did Mr. McLaughlin spend most of the time spot presenting information that was tangential to the master plan or disputing minutia in it instead of presenting it? That seems really weird to me. Thanks.
Well, Jacob, thanks for your comment. The idea, I think, was to present not just the details, you can read that, but to present the context and the relationship. And I think that's what John was focusing on, the context of the master plan, how it functions, and how it relates to the stewardship plan. So that was the idea. And both Nicole and Lane are here, and we'd be more than happy to have them comment anytime that they like.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. And again, this is the introduction, this is the first meeting. We're going to have another meeting, and people are going to have lots of time to read both these things and become involved. And there's going to be a whole series of other meetings. There's going to be a presentation that Parks is going to do. We haven't been invited to be co-presenters there, but they're going to do with both the Greenways Committee and the Parks Advisory Board. And we hope to be there and hope to be allowed to present some of the information in this document.
Okay, thanks for your response.
You bet.
May I add that I did not want to go into all the detail of the park master plan, again, because people can read it, and because I wanted to provide more time for people to weigh in on what they care about this place.
Michael Chavario, did you have a comment or question?
Yes. Is it appropriate to comment on a few specifics that are in the Parks Master Plan final draft?
Sure, of course.
Okay. I have 5 things. I will be brief. On page 13, the map shows an inaccurate wetland boundaries. There is the area between wetland KK and wetland JJ1 shows those wetlands as having quite a few feet in between them. In reality, they run into each other, and there's a big intersection there. And I've seen previous wetland maps that show those literally touching each other, and that's the basis for my opinion that that's an inaccurate an inaccuracy there. And I know that there's it calls for the master plan calls for repair and restoration of wetlands, and I just hope that that area will be seen as a wetland in its entirety. The fact that it's kind of a main trail road there is because it was filled in to be a vehicle road by owners decades past, and that's why it's dry during some parts of the year and wet in other parts of the year. So that's on page 13. And I'll put these in writing to the city. On page 26, it's talking about the gravel roadbed being improved. There is no gravel roadbed existing within the park or the 100-acre wood. There may have used to been, but it's all dirt trail now. And before page 26, survey was cited that said that 86% of people said they did not want a wide gravel road connecting Fairhaven Park and the interurban trail. And unless that was an inaccuracy earlier in that report, that's a real contradiction there. And I, for one, am not in favor of a wide gravel roadbed running through the park anywhere. That's on page 26, that concern. On page 28, I'm on 3 of 5 things now. Page 28, it's talking about removing a trail that's in the middle of wetland JJ1. And that's great. But it should be noted that wetland JJ1 isn't really much of a wetland now and hasn't been for some time. There are some wetland species there, plant species, but the reason it's not really a healthy wetland right now is because it was ditched a long time ago to help drain the area where they put the road through between wetland KK and JJ1. And that ditch needs to be filled in as part of the restoration. It's not specifically mentioned, and maybe that's already planned, but I'm glad that trail is being going to be taken out, but that ditch needs to be filled in, that the trail goes across where it's called to be removed on page 28. There are lists of mammals, non-native plants, and other things in the master plan. One of the mammals that is not listed that are definitely present in the woods are cougars. Just wanted to make that point, but they're not on the list, but they're definitely in the woods. They're frequently seen. And also amongst the non-native plants, there are non-native filberts, particularly along the trails, the more well-used trails. And these filberts are almost all infested with blight that spreads to other filberts in the area. And other mammals that were not listed but have definitely lived in the park were beavers. They were present a couple of years ago in the Hoag's Pond section that covers the master plan. There was one beaver present, it's since gone, and there used to be a family of beavers in wetland JJ2 that really made that a much healthier wetland because they maintained a dam at the outlet creek from wetland JJ2. And so I think beavers should be added to the mammal list. They should be returned, and they should be strongly considered as a part of restoring wetland JJ2 because it will keep it wet for all or most of the year if that dam is maintained by those animals. And I will put these things in writing, of course, to the city, but just wanted to mention them off. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Very helpful and productive comments. Appreciate it. Vince, just a second. Can you make it so Vincent can talk, Robin? Oh, there, I can now. There we go. Okay, Vincent, you should be able to talk.
Yeah, I was able to unmute. So I had 3 points that came to mind during the presentations. And one is to bring to your attention and to remind you, as you probably know, but remember when we had the floods, the epic floods last November 2021? I remember going through the forest and noticing that it functioned hydrologically perfectly. There was no flood damage within the community forest after that heavy rain. Whereas along the interurban trail on Padden Creek, there was one area right under the 12th Street Bridge that needed repair. So I'm just bringing to your attention that hydrologically, it is a sponge and it worked like a sponge, and it probably saved our community from some flooding just because of its existence. So climate resiliency, yes. The second point is that the interurban trail exists around the perimeter of the actual 82 acres. And so bicyclists, if they're looking for a commuter route, it's there already. So we don't absolutely need to have bicyclists for commuting purposes going through the forest. And especially, I'm concerned about the section from, say, from the gravel pit down to 18th Street and down to Fairhaven Park. That's a pretty steep section. And so if we want to have a loop trail that includes that loop, it's going to be difficult to make it bicycle friendly. So maybe we don't really need that in the end. And then I also wanted to bring to everyone's attention that this master plan covers more than just the 82 acres, and that the Chuckanut Community Forest is an 82 acre section that is being, that has a conservation easement to protect its integrity. And we need to remember that when we're talking about what are the recreational uses allowed there. And the recreational uses allowed in quite a bit of the bulk of the master plan is one thing, but within that 82 acres, we need to think about that conservation easement. So that was my 3 points. Thank you.
Thank you, Vince. So thank you very much. Looks like we have, I'm gonna get to Andy's question that he wrote down in just 1 second, but Chris, you did actually reclassify, you and Tina reclassified one of the wetlands, or you believe they should be reclassified formally. And could you briefly speak to that issue?
I can, unless Tina, I'd prefer that Tina address it directly, because she did do the re-rating based on the hydraulic conductivity issue that was raised. And Tina, I don't know if you can unmute and speak to that, or else I can speak to it at a high level. Yeah.
Looks like she's
yeah.
oh no, there, maybe she's on, no, still muted.
But yes, that is addressed in the report, and under the wetlands section, Tina did go out and observe the hydraulic conductivity that was mentioned, and that resulted in a re-rating of the wetland, which resulted in larger buffers because of that. The fact that that really is functioning, as was said, as one larger system than two separate ones.
Yeah, sorry, this is Tina.
Oh.
I finally unmuted, but yeah, Chris pretty much answered that. That information was documented in more than one of the background documents that we read. And when we did our field investigation, although we didn't delineate the wetlands, we definitely saw surface water connection that made it very apparent that those two wetlands are or should be functioning as one. And so we re-rated the wetlands as one unit, which gave it a higher category for functions than it would be as two separate. And then we also recognize JJ1 and JJ2 is another area for wetland consolidation into one system, as was previously mentioned by Michael Shaparo. And I just also wanted to say that when the city or the Parks Department does start to do any restoration actions, in order to meet the city's permitting requirements, wetland delineations are going to need to be actually performed and updated with the current code. And then there's mitigation sequencing for how your project either avoids, minimizes, and or mitigates for any impacts. So there is a process for any actions that occur in regards to trails, rerouting or hydrology connections that would need to happen as a part of just the city's normal process for for authorizing those type of restoration actions.
Thanks, Tina.
And not just restoration actions, Tina, right? And I mean, any actions if we were to do development activities such as trail improvements and the like, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Thanks. And the next item Andy has written in, and it says past meetings have referenced the ecological impact of bicycles, justification to limit this user group. In developing the stewardship plan, did Herrera find any research regarding whether bicycles have a disproportionate impact compared to other user groups such as walking or walkers? Chris, could you address that?
Yeah, Tina, do you want to? I'm happy to.
Okay. Yeah, or Tina, I keep forgetting no picture.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so it was kind of contrary to what you would think with the research that we were able to review, that basically the disturbance from mountain biking to wildlife is pretty much similar to that of someone just walking through the trails. But that doesn't necessarily mean, erosion impacts other things that happen with a bicycle going through an area, especially if it's saturated, which many of the trails where we don't have good hydrological draining or connection, are going to definitely be impacted differently by bicycles. But as far as disturbance to wetland, it wasn't that significantly different than just actively walking through trails, oddly enough.
And but the other thing to keep in mind too is the presence of the trail at all, right? I think that's really the finding in terms of the impact to habitat, in terms of fragmenting the intactness, the size of the habitat units and so forth, by having the trail there at all, I think is the real bulk of the impact.
So bicycles about the same or similar to other users of trails, but the trails having an impact themselves.
Right.
And then that's for wetlands and animals. But there is erosion, widening of trails, and other issues that are related to bicycles that do make a significant difference. And I think there's pretty good evidence about that.
Yep.
Hope that answers your question, Andy.
Right.
I'd love to have either Lane or Nicole speak up if you like. Nicole Oliver, please unmute and let us know what you think.
Thank you. I'm Nicole Oliver, the park director at the city. And I have, my staff and I have reviewed the stewardship plan. We will be reviewing it in more detail. It is a pretty technical, lots of technical citations to other studies. And we found that it is largely consistent with the master plan, and it even identifies the same 7 key problem areas where trails are impacting wetlands and their buffers. I think it's going to be a great resource as we move into phase 1. It's really helpful, and it's what we hope for as far as more information on restoration approaches and priorities. And then there is a couple of areas of concern. The references to changing the conservation easements to further restrict uses and allowances presents potential contradictions with the initiative that the voters elected to pay for the land. And that would have to be approached with great care. So I urge caution in that area. But we really appreciate the effort made on behalf of the Park District in pulling this together, and with Herrera's help, I think it's going to be a great resource as we work together on implementing the plan. I also wanted to let you know that park master plans, park planning processes are public planning processes. This is public property, and we are utilizing information from our existing resources, of which there are many, and the stewardship plan relied on very similar resources that we did as well. And it is an iterative process of implementing a project and a plan for an area this large. It's over 100 acres. And by prioritizing phase one, I want to also point out that the photo that's in the stewardship plan of an improved gravel trail is not in any way identified as what type of trail would be improved. The improvements to trails to that main line that was formerly a gravel road can be done focused on hydrology and drainage, and it's going to require several boardwalks. And I have $600,000 that I have put into the next biennium for that project, in anticipation of getting this plan through the process so we can start actually doing some work. The longer we take, and that's part of my urgency in getting a plan done, the more degradation is occurring and our inability to start the restoration that needs to happen. So I am very encouraged by the content in this stewardship plan, and I'm looking forward to having it be a resource. So thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Appreciate your comments. Lane, you've been involved in the process as well from the city. Did you want to say anything?
You know, I don't think I have anything in addition to what Nicole just said. She covered it all.
Super. Thank you, Lane, and thank you, Nicole. I also noticed that John Blethen, who's been a member of the steering committee for the master planning process, has joined us. And John, did you have any additional comments or thoughts?
I'm glad to see that you guys are continuing this process this evening, and I'm happy that you've added additional material to this process. But beyond that, I have little to say. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Nicole, while you're here, could I ask when are the upcoming meetings? Our next public hearing is going to be on the 27th to revisit this once everybody has a chance to digest the whole process. And I was wondering, when will the Greenways Committee and the Parks Advisory Board meetings be?
The Greenways Committee reviewed the master plan for the second time on last Thursday, the 30th of June, and recommended approval. They don't typically review master plans for approval, but because this is such a extraordinary Greenways funded asset, I felt it was important for the group to weigh in. And then Park Board will be taking a second look at the plan on July 13th. And then we hope to bring it to City Council in late August.
Thanks, Nicole.
Jerry has his hand up.
Would you like to make a further comment? Please.
Yeah. Now that we're commenting, the last one was just question and answer. So I held on my broad comments, and I just wanted to say thanks for the opportunity to do this. And I think it's really important for broad-based public participation to have a public hearing format on this stuff. And I really appreciate all the effort that everybody's put in, especially the citizens and the professionals that have been involved in the process. This is long overdue, but I could go on for that on that one for a while. It was there's been a lot of procrastination on getting this thing going, but the people that were involved in the city that were kind of pushing that to the back burner are no longer around. So I really like the fact that we're moving forward. In the interim, we've seen a lot of damage to the natural elements of the woods by kind of the bootleg use that has gone on there for decades. Just, on the climate issue, just wanted to make a statement. Really, is the primary tree species that is in the 100-acre wood is the Douglas fir, and they grow for centuries, and they are the world champ in terms of carbon capture and storage. especially at the age that they are in that woods. In other words, they filter a lot more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and turn it into stored carbon at a greater pace than pretty much all trees. Both plans see the greatest source of impact of recreational use is on the wetlands, and specifically the wetland crossings. And I very much agree with that. And I think fixing these areas with boardwalks, maybe boardwalks and burrito drains or other facilities. And in some instances, we need to do some decommissioning and some reroutes, as we did with the trail going out of Fairhaven Park, because some of those trails are just in the wrong place, and that's why they have a lot of impact. I strongly disagree with the master plan's priority of building the main trail through the woods first. And my heartburn with it is that it will bring in lots of new users, lots of new use, and there's lots of damage going on to the woods generally from the level of use that's there. So I think the priority should be on fixing the high use areas that are causing a lot of problems, rather than building the trunk trail through the woods from Fairhaven Park to the interurban. Both plans also refer to the city park standards for trails, and those standards need to be modified so that they're narrower. Specifically, you need to lose the wide shoulder. For trails in the woods, that's a way to minimize the footprint and still have an adequately wide trail. Essentially, by their standards, when you're building an 8-foot wide trail, it ends up being 10 or 12 feet of impact. And that's just inappropriate in an environment like this. And I don't know any other land manager that manages trails in a wildland or natural areas that would use that kind of detail. It wouldn't compromise the physical function of the trail, and would considerably reduce the impact zone. For the smaller trails, the narrower trails, we would recommend referring to the Forest Service standard specifications of trails, because basically everybody uses them or some derivative of them, and they're commonly available. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think both plans miss the second greatest negative environmental impact of the trails on the woods, and that is the existing bootleg trails that go down the slope of way too steep an angle. And these are going to become a maintenance and management nightmare if they're not realigned or removed. And in some cases, realignment is because they're functioning as a secondary trail that people like to use and want to continue to use. Realigning them or rerouting them would be the preferred choice. In a few areas, there are really steep trails that can simply go away because they're not needed for the function of the recreation experience. And when I write this up, I'll designate where I think those removals and whatnot can happen. And I did earlier on my comments, but they cause a lot of problems, both environmentally and management wise, when in any kind of trail design guide would say, don't do that. And for a lot of good reasons. So those need to be addressed. But again, they're not nearly as important as the wetland crossings and whatnot. Neither plan addresses accessibility for those with mobility impairments. And there are many opportunities to have this potential, and it would be very attractive. The Access Board has adopted required standards that are very appropriate and sufficiently flexible for natural areas. So I'm not talking about something that would access a building downtown or even a house, but they are that they have been created for creating trail facilities in natural areas. And I think it's really important that we be inclusive of everybody. And quite frankly, if somebody can in the neighborhood that would otherwise use these trails can make the claim that they were excluded because it was not considered, they'd have standing in perpetuity to go after the city for it. So it's not only good public policy, but it's a legal requirement. Neither plan gives us an inventory of the positive or attractive waypoints for natural features and viewpoints and whatnot that should be incorporated into the system. And from my perspective, that's kind of an unaddressed gap. And I assume in a later stage that can be brought into play, but it speaks to creating systems that kind of self-manage themselves. In other words, people go where you want them to go without being managed, without management intervention or educational, or essentially they're just cheaper to manage and they're more attractive to the using public. Speaking very generally, I find that the master plan is too light on minimizing, mitigating, or limiting negative impacts of the current and formally developed system. So thanks for doing this stewardship plan. I think it was greatly needed. I need to review the stewardship plan more. I'm having a hard time swallowing some of the recommendations out of it. I think they're kind of pie in the sky, quite frankly, but I need to look at it in a little bit more detail. And Chris's earlier comments were greatly clarifying in that regard. Good planning, design, and management of trails in sensitive and natural areas can be effectively done only on the ground and on a case-by-case basis. So you really have to look at what the needs and opportunities are there. And in much the art of creating sustainable systems in natural areas is social psychology as much as anything. It requires anticipating what users want, where they will go, where they won't. And instead of the fence along the trail, that's a physical feature. Essentially, you create a draw that draws people in where you want them to go. And what that does is it reduces the impacts that people will have on the natural systems, and it creates a better recreational experience. So I think that kind of approach is very necessary going forward as this plan gets implemented. So thanks for the opportunity to comment.
Thanks, Jerry. I see there's, oh, it disappeared. There was a comment.
It asked if I answered it in writing, but it asked if all written comments will be included in the record for this meeting. And I said, yes, they will.
For sure.
I'd like to ask a question maybe of Chris and Tina. I noticed that the county now has a wildlife advisory committee where they list species of local importance. And they've asked the other governments within the county to become aware of their lists and such. And they list things like the Oregon spotted frog and the western pond turtle and the western toad. And have any of these things been observed in the 100-acre area?
Tina, is that one you could speak to?
I would, anything that we might have mentioned would have been in the baseline report that Ann Eisenher did, where she actually lists like whole orders of species and what's there that's been observed. And then
Whatcom County has a wildlife corridor in the Chuckanut mountain area that is based on, I think it is the toad, the Cascade toad. So with the connectivity being very close to the Chuckanut Forest, even though there is a road, you know, that splits those habitats, it just seemed like it was worth mentioning, that proximity. So, but yeah, not that we necessarily were able to observe all those species during our 2 field visits, but we did see like appropriate habitats for certain species, but definitely refer to the baseline report if you can, because that has a lot of details and a lot of studies were done for that.
I
So
have looked at that, yes. With this Oregon spotted frog is on the endangered species list now, and I just wondered if that was around in our area, but I don't know.
yeah, it's not around in the Chuckanut forest, as far as I know. It's not necessarily the best habitat for what they would prefer. But it definitely has been documented in Whatcom County, but a little further to the east and to the north. It's generally associated with often with canary grass dominated wetlands that are grazed, but they also need to have forest connectivity for them when they migrate out of their once they hatch from their aquatic habitat. So yeah, I would say they're probably not exactly in the forest, but then studies could show things differently. But they're definitely there's definitely room to do more investigation for studies, even since Anne did her report in 2017. So I hope that's helpful.
And one
That
thing
was
I'd
great.
like to say to the general public that's watching this is when all this started with this area was an upzone back in 1980, and it was done by somebody on the council back in 80. And since that time, the population has grown from 30,000 to 93,000. And so we've got a lot more impact on the woods than we ever did. And I just want to keep that in mind. So there's probably a lot less wildlife now than there was.
Well, thanks everyone for participating. I think it's been a very productive meeting. I really appreciate Chris and Tina coming in and taking this time with us and answering our questions. And John McLaughlin, you did a superb job. I wanted to thank you for your measured and thoughtful comments and the broad perspective you brought to it. I appreciate that. And John, you have your hand up. Is there another comment you'd like to make or a question?
I was just going to respond to Hugh. Years ago, I served on the Wildlife Advisory. They were always talking about coming up with a list of important species, and it's glad to see they come up with it. I haven't looked at that list myself, but of the species you mentioned, the Oregon spotted frog is not known from the Chuckanut Community Forest. Vicki Jackson, who has a longtime member of that committee, runs the Whatcom Amphibian Monitoring Program, would know. So I'm fairly confident if she hasn't reported it there, then it's not there. The western toad was formally detected there back by retired biology faculty at Western, Herb Brown, but there haven't been surveys done for that since.
Yeah.
That would be a species that is particularly impacted by all the trail proliferation and the loss of cover as the bootleg trails that Jerry mentioned have expanded. We've moved a lot of the vegetative cover that those toads would be using. And that, of course, applies to many of the other species, where one of our hopes is that we can restore a lot of the vegetative cover and habitat throughout the property. That's going to improve both the recreational experience and improve wildlife habitat. So that's an example where those two goals, of goal 1 and goal 2 from the master plan, are not in conflict at all, that they would actually be supported. But that's going to take a lot of work and a lot of restoration. It's really important work. And it gets back to Jerry's point that there has been a lot of wear, a lot of use, overuse of the place, and it has degraded both recreational wildlife and plant habitat. So that's where the stewardship plan really comes. If we implement a lot of the components there, really.
Thank you, John. I'd like to just comment that one of the people that's been most dedicated to this parcel of land for a long time is Ann Eisinger. And I did get an email from her just during the meeting. Thank you, Frank, for sending this information to me. I will have a look at the documents and send comments if I have time. As I have said in the past, the key to protection of this site is the conservation easement, and the language needs to provide a foundation for the management plan. All my best, Ann. So, Ann, I just couldn't go without adding her comments since she provided them, and great appreciation for all the extensive work that she's done for this parcel and many other parcels in our community. I think we've had a good discussion. I appreciate all the comments of both the visitors. Thank you for coming, and the commissioners. Robin?
Are we going to open up to comments for anyone else who wants to speak?
I think we've had it open for anyone else that wants to speak. But if anybody else wants to speak, please speak up. We are towards the end of our time, but more than happy to have anybody else that hasn't had a chance to talk to speak or to write a comment. And just know that this is the beginning, not the end of a process. This is an introduction of the documents. It's an introduction of the process. We hope to have a much larger meeting that will be really a hearing that's focused not on presentations, but on discussion of ideas. And I've really appreciated the openness of the commissioners to have not 3-minute talks, but an actual conversation that leads someplace and allows people to have a complete whole thought presented. And I want to thank the other commissioners for moving that forward as our process. Anything else, Robin?
No, I don't see anything else. The only, if we're done with comments, we should close the public hearing portion, and then just the one thing that wasn't on the agenda was John's letter and whether you guys want to discuss that tonight.
So I guess I will take the prerogative to close the public hearing. I want to thank everybody for coming. We do have a little bit more business to do. You're welcome to stay. All of our meetings are public and open. Chris and Tina, you're welcome to stay too, but I appreciate your presence here tonight. I know you're busy. Lane, I know Nicole has already left, but you're welcome to stay as well. I will close the public hearing now, and we'll move on to our second item of business. So John drafted a letter that all of you received. It would be representing us. We haven't really had the time that it might take to review that letter or to have a full discussion necessarily by everyone. We do have 4 members present, and so we can certainly have that discussion and make a decision to as John offered it up, he was going to send it, or he drafted it for us to look at. If we are going to send it representing us as commissioners, as the board, I think we should have a motion to do that, and then some discussion about additions, corrections, deletions, that sort of thing. So what are the wishes of the commissioners? I guess while they're thinking, I'll just say John, I really appreciate you doing it. I thought it was thoughtful. I thought it was comprehensive. I personally would be happy to sign it. But I think there's room for improvement in any document. And I wondered, Hugh or John Hymas, did you have any additional comments about that? Any advice for John or a willingness to sign it yourselves?
I wish I had a day or two to look at it. But
That seems, it does seem reasonable. It is a timely thing. I don't think it's critical that it be done tonight, actually, because I think there is going to be more opportunity. Clearly, we want to have it in as early as possible, certainly prior to the city council's decision about this, well in advance of that. Probably in advance of our next meeting, though, I would hope, or at least if we do that, we should have some discussion about the timing of when we could approve it or further consider it. I know it's fairly last minute. John.
I'm about 3/4 of the way through it, and John is the scientist. I got to back what he's saying. It's really thoughtful. So, no, I'm good with it.
I'll sign it.
All right, then I think if that's the discussion, maybe we actually need a motion.
I move we accept the letter that John McLaughlin has wrote, the critique of the draft master plan.
The constructive comments on the master planning process. Great. And do I hear a second for that, for Hugh's motion?
I'll second that.
Yeah, great. And is there further discussion at this point? Hearing none, I'd like to call the question.
I have a question.
Yes.
So regarding timing, I was concerned of the intention of the Parks Department to have this plan reviewed and approved by City Council this month.
Well, what you said was August, I think, if I heard correctly. And I think that's what I heard before too.
Okay.
So I think she wants to move it through it's already gone through the Greenways Committee. It's going to go through the Parks Advisory Board, and then it will go to City Council probably in August. So I think there is time.
All right. So the other question would be, is it too harsh? Should I mean, I care about the place and you know, and the plan and the work and investments that this plan is going to take to implement. And so I want to get it right, but I also want to support our partners in doing this. I don't want to seem overly critical.
Well, I think that's a prudent consideration. I think that, well, where I agree with almost everything in it, I think some of the language could be tempered.
Okay.
What I don't know is from a process point of view, if we do that, I think the next opportunity we would have to approve it would be on the 27th. We certainly could bring it back at that point, and there would be plenty of time to make revisions. If I recall, Nicole, I think the next decision-making point is really going to be a presentation to the Parks Advisory Board. And I know I wrote it down. I'm just looking through my notes. Does anybody remember what date that was?
It's next Wednesday, a week from today at 7:30 in the morning, I think, on Zoom.
Right, yeah. So we certainly could, either approve it as is, or we could have it revised. If we revise it and approve it at our next meeting, that means we wouldn't have it for input for the Parks Advisory Board. Honestly, I believe that where the most change could take place is going to be with the City Council, which is going to be, we have plenty of time for.
Well, I think it should go to the Parks Advisory Board because they all talk to the City Council, a lot of them, you know.
Well, you'd have to get it there before their meeting.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we have a choice, I think, of approving it tonight or approving it at our next meeting. I don't
Yeah.
think we have any other choices. And so we either approve it tonight as is, or we give John a chance to, like many things that are written, they're written with a lot of feeling and at times revisions with kinder and gentler language is always a good idea. And Vince, I saw your question. I don't know if someone answered it, but it basically is a fairly detailed critique of some of the problems with the current master plan, and quite detailed. And I think would be useful to the city. The balance, I think, is when criticism feels harsh and when criticism feels welcome. And I think my personal view is that I think we would be well to put it off until the 27th to have the time to maybe think of it in terms of the input from this meeting. And I think, John, the presentation you did, if I could just give them the video of what you said tonight, I'd be really happy with that. I think that's a kind, gentle, appropriate, supportive, all the things you want it to be, and yet has the key issues in it. But I'm happy to defer to the wisdom of the group. So we have a motion, we have a second, and John raised the issue, should it be revised for?
This might be a question for,
I mean,
I revise it without having to vote on it, have our signature.
Well, you can revise it and send it in for you, but I think we need to see it, and we'd probably have to have a
I
meeting.
know. So like we've done before with person signed letters that Robin has brought around. Revised it.
So we have Catherine here, so let's ask her. Catherine, can we approve the letter pending? It's more the Scrivener's errors. It's kind of pending a rewrite of some of the tonality of the letter. Is that something we can approve tonight?
I believe so.
Okay. So why don't, are people willing to accept that as that we will approve the content and John will revise the format slightly and send it, and he could send it to all of us to review before it finally goes out, because we're going to sign it anyway. That sound okay?
Okay with me, whatever.
John Hymas?
Yeah, I don't mind. I don't mind the way it's written now, personally.
Well, we're all gonna have to sign it or not sign it when it comes to us anyway. It takes a signature. So John, let's do that. Go ahead and make the revisions you think are appropriate. We'll review it carefully when we get it. We'll approve it at this meeting, and we'll go on to make sure that it's okay when we sign. That sound right?
No, we can't go up there right now. You're gonna take a shower.
Thank you. So we want to vote then? All those in favor, raise your right hand and say yay.
Yay.
Yay. We got it. Okay. Unanimously passes. I don't think there's anything else on the agenda. Is there, Robin?
The only thing is the technical challenge of getting the signatures and everything. I am leaving tomorrow night and I will be back sometime Monday afternoon. So I could do it then. Somebody else could run it around. John Brown's not here, so.
Well, Monday afternoon, we have to get it done and to the commission, the Parks Advisory Board by Wednesday.
Do we want to get it in there a day or two ahead of time so they have time to read it? I could do it Monday night. I could run it around and get it signed.
Robin, may I ask, is there a need to have the signatures be original? People could affix their e-signatures, and that would save you some running around.
Yeah, we seem to do better with actual signatures than trying
Okay.
to do e-signatures.
All right, my mistake.
No, it's a good idea. It's just, it's not going to happen that way, I don't think. But John, are you going to When do you think you might be done with it?
I'd like to get a little more sleep tonight and maybe tomorrow.
I
And
could
then-
potentially do it tomorrow whenever you finish it. John Hymas usually gets home around 4, right, John? And are you around then, Hugh?
Yes.
So then I could do them. I could pick it up from John wherever he wants me to pick it up from, get those signatures and then bring it to your house, Frank. Or if you just have to give me directions to your new house. So,
I'll send them to you. Yeah,
okay.
thank you. All right, so now can I call the question? We already voted on it, I guess, so I don't need to call the question again. Then we figured out the mechanism by which we're going to execute the what we just voted on. So I think hearing nothing else.
Yes, wait, I have one more thing.
Uh,
I noticed when we were conducting this meeting tonight, that you have this thing where it says participants. And when I click on it, I could never get the participants. I could just get the screen with the people that were the talkers, you know, the board and the lawyer. But
there's a list of participants on the right-hand side of the screen. If you click on it, there should be.
It actually only comes up for people who are co-hosts. So I could make all the board co-hosts if you want to see who's at the meeting. I can read you names.
John Bleffin and Phyllis McKee are the two people that are still here. So,
right.
and
Vince and Remy, Steve Wilson, John Bleffin, you know, that's Sonia M. Michael, we know, Jessica Orr, Jacob Stewart, Jerry Wilbur, Danielle, and Andy. The people who are at the meeting.
Robin, can I interrupt again?
Yes.
I don't believe I'm a host, but I was able to see all of those.
You're a panelist. You were made
Right.
a panelist.
Hugh is also a panelist. So there should be a
so
list
he
of
should be able-
panelists and attendees, and you can toggle between them.
yeah,
Maybe
you
that's
just up on top. There's attendees on the right and panelists on the left, and if you click on it, it will list the two separate groups. So, do you see that list on the right-hand side, Hugh?
Yes, I do now. I tried that earlier and it didn't go over to attendees. It just stayed with panelists.
There's a little bit of delay where it hesitates a bit before it goes over.
Maybe that's.
But it took me a while to figure that out too. Yeah. So that's great. So it sounds like we have a non-problem.
Thank you for that correction, Catherine.
Oh, yeah, you know, that's what I'm here for.
Yeah. I think that's everything, Frank.
All right. Hearing nothing else for the good of the order. All right.
We have the next meeting.
We will
That's the one thing.
next meet on the 27th at our regular time at 6 p.m. right here in cyberspace. And I'd like to adjourn the meeting at 8:02.
Catherine, say hi to Bob for us.
Yeah.
Will do.